Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Naylor, and I'm the director of the Maine Enneagram Center for Transformation and Well-Being. And I'm zooming in from South Portland, Maine. And today we have the pleasure of beautiful Type 8 Cece. You're still a Type 8, right?
Yeah. I don't think we'll ever see a change to that.
Awesome, awesome. Um, and she will, take us on her own particular journey. What the agony and the ecstasy has been for her Type 8 evolution, and how she works with it in the world. So just a pleasure to have you here, Cece, and just invite you to say a little bit about yourself, and then maybe how you began this journey of the Enneagram. So I'll turn it over to you, and uh, just go with what feels correct.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. This is going to be cool. Um, as for my journey with the Enneagram, it's always interesting because in courses along the way, people have been like, or teachers have asked, well, how has the Enneagram helped you evolve, etc. And I always get a bit, well, it didn't start with the Enneagram because I did hear about it, I suppose, like read it in some magazine or whatever. But then I wasn't was it called personality typology, and I didn't think much more about it until I had the proverbial smack in the face by life, which in my case was a neurological illness and a chronic illness, yeah.
Mhm.
And I just had this, I just sort of had this sense uh, that you're meant to get something here, and you better get on with it because if you don't, something else might be taken away from you. And so, while before I was like interested in, personal growth and creative visualization and psychology and all kinds of stuff from a basically mental level, I say, then this is what sort of kicked me into the deeper, like hardcore personal growth or inner growth stuff. And I didn't. I went on some courses. I had a lot of teachers coming from the Osho kind of tradition.
Oh,
And so from that direction, very much focus on experiential teaching, body mind connection, meditation and therapy in conjunction, that kind of thing. So while I was doing that, I sort of came across the Enneagram again a couple of years into it. And then it just sort of landed in a deeper way. But the interesting thing is when I first met it in that context, it was in I don't know, I think it's called ID therapy or the new identity process, lots of screaming and shouting and all kinds of projections going on. Um, and there in that course, wasn't Enneagram related in any way, except that they mentioned it. And they said that everybody with my diagnoses was a nine. And I was like, I read there was, I think, Helen Palmerish itemized lists that they had lying around, and I saw those, and it said, stubborn and repressing your anger, and I was like, yeah, check, check, because sure, I was repressing anger, except I didn't really, So, but when you only have that, and you get told this is your style, then you sort of make it fit whatever you perceive about yourself.
yeah.
And then when I learned about the Enneagram, of course, I started reading books out loud with my husband. We read to one another to get it in sort of when you read it by yourself, it just gets through very quickly. But when you read it out loud, it's like you get the chance to pause and discuss stuff. And he
Yeah.
was like, well, he was a bit hesitant on the nine. And then when we got to type 8, which was obviously before that, you dive into what you think is you, right? And then you read it from the start. And then he was with the 8, he said, this is more like you actually. And I was like, I was seeing my dad all over the place, who was interestingly enough a 1. So, but when I was a kid, he was, coming off as the 8. He was very angry with me because I didn't sort of fit the expectations, I suppose. So anyway, then I started looking at the 8, and I hadn't really looked at much before in any way. So this was like and so with some with some doubts into it, and with, maybe I'm not this aggressive, I'm not this controlling, I'm not this, because it was also, I was like, isn't this a bit exaggerated? And he was like, not necessarily. And yeah, interesting. But so what the Enneagram taught me about my type wasn't, or about myself, we could say, wasn't necessarily that much. I don't mean to sound conceited, but I've been doing, so it was more that suddenly I had a sort of conceptualized context to plonk the different experiences down into, which was yeah, a bit different, I think. And I read quite early on. I read I think, a book about from Eli Jackson Bear, who, as I understand it, is a sexual 8, and he said everybody has a kind of mixed, it's a mixed blessing to find your type, because on one hand it's like, yay, if somebody sees me, and on the other hand it's like, oh shit, they see me. And so I was, and I said, not the 8s. The 8s go, yeah, so, and well, there you go. So for a long time it seems like other people's problem, yeah, because people are afraid of you. Well, and then it takes a while before it sort of, you start realizing that this is not much fun. It would be, and then but I had some of that before even, but I couldn't put it in context until I got in touch with the Enneagram on a deeper level.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that. I'm reminded of when I discovered I had the pattern of the type 4, and then understood it sort of conceptually, and then started witnessing it over time in all of me, and I was like, oh my God, this is worse than I ever imagined. And then began the work of trying to become more conscious and present, and less often taken by the reactive patterns or the illusion patterns. But yeah, so when you started to sort of unpack it and sense more into what was 8-like in you, what were the things? Anything that was surprising or reaffirming? I mean, what aside from it's having that kind of strong presence and a sense of direction, and I can handle things, and being sort of born leaders in their own way. You mentioned something about not being like as aggressive as it was described, and I wondered what's true for you, just in your own experience.
Well, but to just address the bit about aggressiveness first, it's like, I mean, before you read into it, isn't it? I think very many Enneagram books will describe a kind of sliced alone, which would be wrong anyway, but the very sort of butchy 8, and they're all male, and there is like this very rough energy. And I was like, because I was, I mean, if at all I ever felt, hesitant to go into something or whatever, I would take that as, well, maybe you're not an 8. It was just so black and white in the beginning. So
Yes,
that's
yes,
what that was about. But then I obviously quite soon, it's just, oh, this is not the aggression they're talking about.
yeah,
This is something else, and it's not aggression as in being angry and violent, but rather as in being assertive and being and not assertive as in, oh, I'm just assertive kind of way, but more as it's neutral. It's not, about a good thing. It's just that your response would be to go forward. Your
yes.
response would be to meet. Your response would be like, and that was an interesting thing to have that described from that direction, and sort of
Mm,
the solar plexus thing that just
hmm.
it just doesn't stop, and doesn't um, and believes that in my I've told the story before when I was in part two. You were actually there, I think,
Hmm.
in 2011 in the barn, last part two that Don ever did. Must have been, he died the next year. Um, we did the good youth movements. And when we were doing, I think, type 9, did these, rows
Hmm.
uh, and just, walking back and forth. And I was somewhere in the middle. I was just suddenly aware of how I kind of people, lagged behind and they weren't, I'm raised by ones, I'll tell you that. It was a very one-ish kind of environment I grew up in. And people weren't doing it, they weren't doing the lines, they weren't doing it properly. And I could just feel how I attempted to steer all these 45, 50 people, whatever, with my gut and sort of just trying to make it. That's a lot of work because obviously it responded poorly to exercise. So but it was just so cool to notice that, oh, this is this gut thing they're talking about. It's
Yeah.
the some very real belief on some plane that I would be able to move people literally with
Yeah.
my physical energy
Yeah.
without even talking to them or looking at them or anything, which is obviously a bit um, well, there's a tad of hubris in there somewhere, but still, it's it's like yeah, that was very interesting to see how. And by then, the good thing about having done all this stuff first is like I could see these things with a kind of wow, this is cool. It's really stupid, but it's also very interesting. It
Yeah.
wasn't, I didn't have to judge myself each time because I knew I was like this before. I just hadn't seen this. And
Yeah.
so that was really, that was a sort of very palpable kind of,
Mm.
oh, they mean this kind of thing.
Awesome. Beautiful. Well, the eights in my life, they, I often feel their gut energy, right? It doesn't just end with them. It kind of permeates the space. And they do have a kind of capacity to move the space along without even using words, right? It's like it's just a waveform that comes out of them and enlivens people or scares them, one or the other. But there's a way when it's really when I have a dear friend Michael is a type A, and when he's in a healthy place, everybody just enlivens around him. There's just something about the life energy that just starts sort of leaking into everybody, and they become, more present and more immediate. And of course, so it's a beautiful quality of enlivening, and I think of that sort of moving forward energy. It's like AIDS have been given a kind of robustness that's just sort of abides in them and is like ready to let's go forward sort of thing. So when you were a little girl, did you do you recall noticing some maybe dilemmas you might have had as a little one, around being robust, or was that suppressed and you were, playing, had to tone it down? I mean, what was true for you when you were
Uh,
younger?
I, as I said, my dad was a one, is a one.
Mm-hmm.
My mum's 5, actually.
Mm.
Although she had a one mother, I think. I never met her mother. She died before I was born. But I'm willing to bet her mother was a one. And also my older sister was a one. So there was a fairly, I think Peter Zappel wrote an article at some point about like the climate you grow up in, Enneagram.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was a very one-ish place to be.
Yes.
And so I I sort of got raised my first, formative years of my life basically as to understand that maturity was a good thing. It was supposed to be mature. It was supposed to be this and that. And obviously, I was the least mature because I was the little one until I had my younger sister, but that wasn't until I was like 6. So for quite a few years, I was sort of just running after, a feeling of trying to catch up and being like God, I was so, you know, what's the word? It's like you're adult, but you're not.
Oh,
Um,
like tomboyish or
no, it's like pre. I
oh,
was. imitating the grown-ups with
Yes. Okay.
whatever mental capacities I had.
Mm-hmm.
But I was imitating the results of their reasoning because I couldn't yet reach it myself. So I was sort of, that this is what every parent expects their kid to do. Basically, they try to reason with you before you're old enough, and the best you can do is try and just memorize whatever they told you.
Yes.
But well, long story short, when I started school a year early. So I was, because they envisioned some kind of gap year in the States or whatever. And I was, when they sort of you test the kids to see if they're actually mature enough to start school. And it turns out I was, but they weren't testing, and they weren't looking at emotional maturity. They weren't looking at anything of that sort. They were looking at what you could understand and if you could reach various parts of your body with various, arms and fingers and stuff. And so I ended up starting school with people who were a year older, and that might not have been the greatest idea because I was also a know-it-all, and I was helping my classmates to realize the typical grammatical errors that people make and stuff, and I was pointing them out for them,
Yeah.
and that went over not really well. So I ended up being picked on a lot,
Oh.
and which was, I think, also a reason that when I started reading about the eight, and I was like, I was supposed to hit them, and I was, and I would just withdrew basically.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I suppose I could say that in my family, that was okay. I was happy in my family. That was my, like, I loved my being with my family and stuff. But also I was like the the black sheep, or the spotted bunny, as it were. Not because it wasn't like you're bad and the other's not, but you're different. And the message I picked up, that they wanted to convey that or not, was that there is something wrong with you for not being a one, basically, or for not being a competency kind of type. So my reactivity or emotional realness, or whatever we prefer to call it, my intensity, was not, that was seen from what I could pick up as a kind of immaturity sign. Like, because I was supposed to be, mature, and mature people could X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So that was, I realized a lot longer, a lot later. Right? I just realized that this has been had a huge impact on my, like, being with groups and stuff. Also, I'm social last, so it's an interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you point to something that I think I've discovered too, is that I picked up on the atmospheres of my mother and father, and so my mother's was a 2, my dad a feisty type 6, and so those patterns at certain times get activated, and they're not, they're sort of living patterns in my neurobiology or my brain pathways, and so I know for myself the foreignness part of me didn't really start showing up very dramatically until I hit 18 or 19. And so I was just thinking, and it sounds like you have a pretty strong 1 overlay, so you must have an interesting inner critic who has a package of oneness. I mean, what's true for you?
That's not really true at all, actually. This is just it's so interesting because my husband's a 1.
Oh,
Unsurprisingly, he's a 1 with a 9 wing, and he's self-preservation first, and that's my father. And they're not alike, I promise you. They're not alike in any other way except those tiny ways.
yeah,
It's just so fascinating how we work. Well, we can pick him, can't we? And so when we started reading the Enneagram books, it was just so interesting because most of the books start with 1, and we read about the 1, and he was like, "Oh God, I recognize this," and I was like, "Me too." And then when we started talking about it, we realized he recognized it for one reason, and I recognized it for a totally different reason, and he could resonate with the whole thing.
yeah,
We didn't, I don't think we met the levels at that point, but if we
yeah,
were to have met them, we would have seen that he can see the whole thing and the whole, objectives underneath and stuff. And I was just, this is right, that's wrong, blah blah. that could just as well go with the 8. So it's just I had the one overlay is very superficial.
Got it.
It's like
Yeah.
it's opinions, and it's about how you prepare stuff on a sort of technical level, a certain level of correctness, whatever. But it's not the superego was a very fascinating chapter for me to look into because I couldn't find it, and it wasn't that I didn't doubt that I had one
Yeah.
because I mean, obviously, but the thing about people talking about this voice, and I was like, what voice? And I couldn't because
Yeah.
no, and then I spoke. This is just was it like 7 years ago or something? I got a friendship that was unprecedented to me, the level of it, and we talked about. She's a 9, um, and we talked about how she had an ex who was also an 8, although with a strong 9 wing, and how 8s could, when you're in their doghouse, it's like if you betrayed some kind of trust along, they will just shut you out, and it's just going to be you try to sort of speak or whatever, and it's not that we won't speak. It's just that there is no door. So
Yeah.
there's no, yeah, I'm here for you, but there
Yeah.
is this glass wall, and there is no cracks in that wall. And
Yeah.
she was like, this is such an uncomfortable feeling to be
Mm-hmm.
faced with this wall, and you can't leave because you want to do this. It's in a weird way, it's like holding people hostage, and not in the sense that you keep them there because they're welcome to leave, but they're not. It's just a funny. When she talked about this, anyway, I realized this is my superego. This is what my superego does to me, which is obviously it's me because
Mm-hmm.
I do that because I'm this 8.
Yeah.
And but the thing is, when I've done something like been in this kind of interview, or sorry, this is pieces of cat floating around here. Uh, when I've been talking to somebody, doing an interview, whatever, and it's just I later I realized that I should have said this. It came to me later that this would have been relevant, blah, blah, blah. And I feel like there is something that I did that wasn't what I wanted to do, in
Mm-hmm.
retrospect.
In retrospect,
And
yeah.
this, if this is a thing that I feel is bad, I can't, it's very hard to say what this would be, but it's just something that made me it didn't resonate with me actually afterwards, or where if it's something that I think I should have done otherwise, and if I'm displeased with what I did, this is going to be the superego is going to just be this wall. And it's like it already happened. There are 2 things we can do if something already happened. One is go back and redo it, and usually that's not a possibility. And
Mm-hmm.
2 is just sit in that doghouse till it goes away, till it sort of fades, till enough new stuff comes in that we can just let it go away. But it never really disappears.
Mm.
There's never any um, there will never be any resolution to it unless I can actually go back and redo something, which I think never happens because that's it's not those kind of scenarios really. And I just realized this is why I didn't hear my superego or see it as something different from me because it just had I just identified completely with it
Yeah.
in a way that I couldn't really. It wasn't easy for me to to sort of distinguish it from
Yeah. Yeah.
me
Yeah.
because I had to, which is obviously tends to be usually the case for me that I identify this kind of energetic component to it. In
Mm-hmm.
which case was this just
Yeah.
it's just shut down, go and think about what you did, that kind
Uh-huh.
of thing. But it's
Yeah.
not you're just not welcome. You're not there's no
Yeah.
love for you.
So is it? So as I hear it, with other 8s, when I teach the inner critic class, often 8s say, I don't hear a voice. Maybe I don't have an inner critic, and
Well,
so I say, well, maybe notice how your pattern of judging others comes up because the way you judge others is often the way we judge ourselves. And it could be really subtle and you don't notice it. Maybe it's a felt sense, but that inner critic message that we classically say for the 8 is you're good or okay or lovable if you're strong and in control of the situation. Does that resonate for you as something that's a driver that you feel like I've got to respond to, or I'm not being good on an unconscious level, or what do you notice about that?
In control of the situation is very, very relevant, I think, because that's the kind of scenario I was just talking about. Is like I was temporarily in control of the situation, and I failed to exercise that control,
Yeah.
obviously, because I didn't do this. And now the control is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a serious problem for, somebody here. And it's like, that's where there's a kind of stuckness to it,
Yes. Okay.
because there is no, or an absolute kind of energy. So I would not. I mean, I've heard, and obviously it wasn't that I doubted that I had an inner critic. So obviously this, you're judging others. How are you judging yourself? Not the same way at all.
Oh,
They can be
interesting.
weak all they like. They can be out of control. That's not a problem as long as, So it didn't really, until I got the quality of it, like the energy
Like the
quality.
energy. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, it's 100% absoluteness around it. There is this kind of rock hard thing, and we
Mm.
can't do anything about it, and we can't. So it just freezes
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
ex- except for the cold, because it's not cold.
Yeah.
Uh, but something
Yeah.
is just stuck.
Well, I wonder, Cece, do you notice any within that stuckness? One of the things that sort of gets traditionally said about the 8s is they're a rejection type. So the sense being that I'm in this again one story, one flavor of it is I already feel a sense of core rejection. I don't know why. It's unconscious. Maybe it developed when I was 2 or 3. So and I feel like I'm rejected already, so I'll just reject you in advance so I don't have to go through rejection. And I, disassociate maybe from my heart and feeling my heart. So is that stuckness pattern, is there rejection connected with it? Are you rejecting yourself? Or I know this
Uh,
is a, yeah,
yeah.
okay, yeah,
I was when you asked about my journey, and that was, when I started my journey, and then there is now, which is like 25 years later. And two things that have been there are two things that have been sort of felt relevant, or sort of just coming up more in my, you see it, you look at it, you sort of, it's just in later years. And one of those is the object relations, which is interesting because obviously Don and Russ did them on part one. So it's not, they had slightly different terms because this was in '05, so
yeah,
quite a time ago. And they would call the 8 the ambivalence, with the 2 and the 5. And to me, well, that's a whole another interview. but the ambivalence to me sent the wrong message, because it sort of placed, they also called the others connected and disconnected. So they placed rejection as a thing in kind of the middle. That's where it, antically kind of ends up. And for me, when I look at it now and I see this with attachment overall, and we all try to, and sometimes it sort of doesn't, sometimes we go a step further because it doesn't work, and we don't stand there in attachment wanting it to work, which is one option, obviously. We can also get frustrated and then this happens, or we can just say fuck it altogether and then this happens.
yeah,
And that's where I sort of, aha. And also the thing with rejection would be the go-to, I think, when I heard first of rejection, was I would be rejected. That would be is that what I'm, and I can see that definitely, but the real problem is not that I'm going to be rejected. The real problem is I'm doing the rejecting,
yeah,
as you said, as a precaution. Um,
yeah, kind of preemptory.
so that's I think that's a very, I do think the object relations, it can come up in various stages on this journey, but there is an aspect of, especially of the energy of whichever of these three is the strongest for you, that becomes relevant at a quite deep
Yeah.
level of this journey.
Yeah. Well, so maybe I'd love to hear just generally what are the sort of patterns of the eight that you identify with, and and what are the sort of things you've needed to do inner work on to heal or become more present. So it's sort of two questions. Just start with sorry about that. Just what are the ways that you can say you identify with the eight pattern? What's your understanding for your own self?
I don't know that there is a triadic grouping that where I don't identify with the eight. It's like all of them. And in the beginning, I think for many people, I would guess the Hornivians is a very you can find yourself in there fairly quickly. Again, if you have a teacher who teaches it in a way that is not saying that you're assertive and you're withdrawn, and
Yeah.
you do all of it obviously, but where's your problem?
Uh-huh.
And to see that where you go overboard with it and where you sort of end up not really getting what you'd set out to get with it. And so it started, I think, with those. And funnily enough, it would start with the assertiveness, this kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing where I wanted to have everybody do. And I do recognize, by the way, that you said, but the eights can do this. They can shift the energy in a room. That's what I've been doing in the experiential courses I've been facilitating. That's the same energy. It was just so then it's relevant. In the
Yeah.
barn, it wasn't not relevant. It wasn't a job. It was just something that started happening. But anyway, I think after both this strategic kind of thing or the social style, which I have a lot to say about that term,
Okay.
but the assertiveness after that, and also this emotional realness or the reactivity or intensity or whatever we call it, that
Yes.
also was identifiable quite early on. Um, then the center came in for me. Then the sort of what the instinctual center actually entailed.
Hmm.
That as the identification.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that, and I don't know how much you've seen of what I do, but there's a lot of centers in there. Because I think work with the centers is really, 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 really key to all
Yeah.
of this. But then, sorry, you're saying something?
Well, so you mentioned social style that you had some things to say about that, and there was one other.
That was just the term. This is not, because
So,
it's made to sound like this is what you like,
uh-huh.
with how you act. And I
Yeah.
don't know how to assert myself. I'm
Yeah.
not stupid, it's just sometimes I
Oh,
just keep my mouth shut. But that's not when I get problems. So that's why sort of the social style is like more an inner reaction, and then what you do with it. Because
yeah.
people go, oh, ones are assertive. Yeah, well, not inside of themselves, they're not. It just comes out as that for you, but they've consulted their superego.
Right.
So
Right.
that's what I meant about the social styles term. So never mind.
Yeah. Well, so say a little bit about the well, sometimes for type eights, depending on how they grew up as little ones, there can be a tendency for the heart center to be closed down. Not always, but it's sort of an orientation that can occur. So, what has been true for you? What did you notice about your heart center?
Um, I I wouldn't use the word closed down.
Hmm.
I would have used the word equipped with a moat and some railings and very, very protected.
Yes.
So it's not that I couldn't necessarily access stuff in there. But between my superego, when the super, I mean, the superego can do two things. It can judge me, or it can judge other people.
Mm-hmm.
It would judge and sort of interact with other people. It would also obviously have me keep my heart center well out of the way.
Yeah.
So that would be between that and the not being too keen on soft emotions. Again, in oh, it's laughable to a four, isn't it? Um, but between those, obviously, it wasn't, shall we say, well exercised,
Okay.
especially not in connection with other people. I mean, I in my teens, you should have seen my poetry. I was a I was a four. No, I wasn't a four, but obviously, but it's like
Yeah.
not that there wasn't stuff there.
Yeah.
So, and that's been, I think, what's come after the growth or the realizations that happens with the social style and Bolivians and the centers and stuff. And you learn with the centers, you asked how. It was about, again, learning this, how this gut thing comes out and how it feels when that's activated. Because
Yeah.
I also thought in the beginning, I think too much. Eight's not supposed to think this much. And then I was like, what am I thinking about? And then it sort of dawned on me that, well, we think about different things and with different kind of, it's not that there's no mental activity, it's just that where is it coming from? Well, it's sort of
From the
but then
gut.
I started recognizing that this, you can think from whatever your gut is doing, and that can be the sort of source of this
Absolutely.
machinery. And
Yeah.
so that was also, there was another thing that I could, you can get the impression that, instinctual types, or maybe, yeah, at least eights, you can get the impression you don't think, you just do stuff. And I'm like, well, it doesn't really work that way. Also, I'm fine at scrambling my gut with my head, so that works. And as you said, that will leave the heart out. Um, so for me, funnily enough, maybe because of my situation in school, which sort of lasted very long, because it wasn't that I was picked on forever, but again, rejection. Okay, no, thank you.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't engaging.
Yeah.
So possibly because of that, or because of something else entirely, I think a lot of my inner growth. I mean, I've been to tons of courses and trainings and stuff, and obviously those have been key because otherwise I wouldn't have known what to recognize, what to look for.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I think a lot of growth happens in facilitation. A lot of growth happens when you're around all these people and doing this protection style holding space thing that I can ground your energy, I can do this, and then a lot of things can happen when I do that because I'm not put on the spot, because I'm the one who's doing it. But it's funny acting from that in a way. uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just another form of growth course for you.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure you're aware of that because you do facilitate lots of stuff. So
Absolutely. That's where my major learning occurs. It appears.
yeah, and I think that is where my heart started unfurling, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
more because I could do that on the side. I could allow myself to care about stuff and to
Mm-hmm.
again care for what started out as these people that I'm now responsible for these few
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
And then that could sort of spread out in the rest of my world.
Yeah.
Mm, Still fairly exclusive, I'd say. I'm quite stingy.
Well, it's interesting from my viewpoint that I've noticed when, for some aides, when they're feeling safe and sort of really present, they actually have quite big hearts and can be quite robust in how they love people. There's just a sense of pow when they care for you. It's not like a light, dainty, soft, nine-ish heart. It's like boom. This is, and it's beautiful, and it's often very generous. The eights that I've really appreciated are often really inspired to bring out the courage and authenticity in other people. It's like, whatever I've arrived at as feeling safe and whole and strong, I want to give that away to you too. And they have a kind of, in my experience with one of my coaches, it's like, I'd be standing on the edge of a ledge, afraid to take the next step, and he would just push me off, right? And I would go down and land and say, well, thank you for doing that, because I wasn't going to make the next step. So this kind of empowering quality I've noticed and really valued. It reminds me, when Gurdjieff was at his best, there's a sense of empowering and really bringing people into what's really real. So how do any of those themes resonate for you? Is that something you feel inspired to do, or what's your...
Yeah. I say we because it's me and my husband, we did lots of this together.
Oh,
Um, I think we had our first experiential course that we facilitated and created and facilitated in 2003, something like that, four. And then we stopped right before the pandemic. Not to do with the pandemic, it just happened because of other reasons. So when everybody started cancelling their stuff, we didn't have to because we were sort of taking a leap year. And then that turned out into a couple of leap years. And now I'm in the international arena, which is nice, but which sort of also confined to Zoom is kind of limited in ways. So I'm really missing the in the room thing
yeah,
because a lot of stuff you can do in the room.
yeah.
And to me, that's um, it's it's the greatest gift to be able to do that for people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
in a way, you said to share whatever strengths and things you come across. And I think the challenge for the eight, because when you do share this with people, what they do land in is this, love and acceptance and um, a dissolution of like things that are held in rigid structures. And then there is this. I mean, I read very few of your blog posts, but I did read one about an eight in recovery who was this kind of quite magnanimous person. As I read it, he helped people a lot, and he was consistently relapsing himself, and eventually he died. And I just cried when I read that.
Mm-hmm.
Just such an eight-ish. Um, you can go just up to the door.
Yep.
Or it's something else. I'm not sure how to
Yeah.
even. But it's like, and you know what's there. You know all about it, and you can help people through it, and everything is, and you can't seem to,
Do it
follow.
yourself. Yeah. Yeah. One of my dear friends was an eight who,
Yeah.
same pattern. He would save other people's lives, but he couldn't get through that one door that allowed him to, savor expansion and letting go of a pattern. He could see it clearly, and he couldn't knock the door down. But he did it for other people. He sacrificed himself. So that's so heartbreaking to see, and certainly I imagine he was. I have this faith that he was rewarded someplace else and that he'll be back again. But yeah, so I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, anything like any sort of favorite area of the Enneagram we haven't talked about that you would like to share about? Because you wrote the book about the instincts, and which is so obviously heart and soul is something you love. Anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, well, I did write about the instincts. Well, wrote about the centers, and the instincts were part of that. So that's
Yeah.
the aspects book is the centers and the instincts, because
Okay.
I just I got fed up with all these books describing subtypes because I think they're doing humanity a big disservice.
Yes,
Not
I
not
agree.
necessarily wrong, but they would have to be so nuanced, and they would have to describe them differently depending on their stacking, not only on of the of the instincts, but also of the zones within the instincts.
Yes,
So
yes.
if you have the so I developed a session, an instinctual preferences sorting session, where people do a test and then they send that to me, and I do an evaluation, and then we have a session, and then they get a feedback sheet afterwards
Yeah.
that maps out not only the instincts but also the zones within
Yeah.
the. They
Yeah.
get a 9 star
Yeah.
case with which, because for some people it's like they have the strongest zone that they have, say sexual magnetism, and then all social, 3 zones in a row, and then comes the rest. So are they from majority of points they would be a social 3, say,
Yeah.
but from the strongest zone they would be a sexual 3,
Yeah.
and depending on how you count it, both would be true, and that would be come out in different ways, and then they sort of get, aha, this is why I can't, this is why, and then things clear up, which is
Yeah.
rewarding, I think.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
why I wrote that one, because, and also to hammer home yet again the fact that we have all 3 centers. We're not, you know, yeah, well, but
Well,
we're all,
yeah, I totally agree because to say, okay, you're a sexual 4 only tells you a little bit of information.
yeah,
When you start looking at the 9 zones, it's a whole deeper, more specific exploration of how you might have it, how your social, or sexual, or self-pres instincts operate. And so it's interesting. I appreciate that feels like the most useful way of working with the instincts. But there's a lot of folks don't go with that. They that's just not their thing. And
I
yeah,
think many people are very drawn to descriptions, aren't they? Like
yes,
lists
they are.
of
Yeah,
descriptions.
this is who I am right here.
Also, I think many people don't know that it's out there, because it's. I don't know any other book, frankly, and I'm not tooting my own horn or anything, but this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
the. I didn't even bring it to the interview. I should have had it. Aspect of you, but also I'm actually writing. I'm putting the finishing touches on another one right now, on a couple of other ones actually, but the one that's in like the what I really want to gear more into, because I've always been more interested in working in the intermediate um, level Enneagram stuff. I don't want to do introductory courses. I'm not particularly interested in doing courses that let's look at type 1, let's look at type 2, let's look at type 3, etc. Because and there's so much of that anyway. So what I want to do is look at inner growth,
Yes.
and I sort of want to I want to discard the Enneagram, and I want to look at inner growth, and then we can bring in bits and pieces, because assuming that you already know you're a 4, you're this and that instinctual stacking, and so this is not something you need to find out, but what to do with this,
Yes.
and to see the next step of it. I think people have to just put this knowledge aside for a while, and then look at but we can still do this we don't have to put the whole Enneagram uh, frame aside. We just need to put the typology aside.
Yeah.
And so I'm writing right now. I'm again pretty much written a book that may have changed its title today. Because I was discussing with someone, and so I don't know what title it came out under, but it's about how we can actually what we can do when we know the type, we know these
Yeah.
things there,
Yeah.
but how then do I work with this as a person, and how is my Enneagram type relevant, and how is it not, and how can I use these various triads and stuff to
Yeah.
not go away and look at them and study them and have these diagrams, but to actually
Feel them.
to be more aware of myself.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I think it's going to be called the Enneagram Way.
Enneagram what?
the Enneagram way.
Yeah.
But
Nice.
I had another name for it, but she suggested this, and it's actually, but it's very, it's it's very practical.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. I haven't to date written a book without exercises in it. I've always had like exercises. This one doesn't have exercises because the whole thing is this giant exercise. It's like a practice. And
Awesome.
so
Yeah.
that hopefully come out in the next couple of months, and
Wonderful.
I will stitch together a quite deep and like year-long or 9-month long training to go with that. Is the intention.
Awesome. Yeah. So if we're getting close to the hour here, I don't want. I'm wondering if there's if you had any sort of advice or encouragement for young eights, little boys, little girls, teenagers, young adults, anything that comes to mind as encouragement or a way of learning about your type that was helpful for you.
It's hard to narrow it down. I would want to, and I can't really phrase that. It's really hard to phrase, but I would want to try and somehow get them to understand that. I mean, the phrase that comes out is "Don't be so hard on yourself," which is we've heard that 1,000 times before. We've had all kinds of types for all kinds of different reasons, and the eights will go, "What? I'm not. This is not a problem." And so it's like to recognize where you actually are. I think this piece of the superego that we talked about is a very to see that this is really not a, a voice saying you're
Yes.
so bad, because you don't have everybody else is bad. I'm fine. I'm actually kind of bad, but that's it's your problem, not mine. That will be the eight. So it won't be
Yeah.
inducive to,
Yeah. That's a great example. Yeah.
but to look at that. And also, if you've been doing this for a while, if you're not new to it, I would very strongly, and this is what this new book lands in, look at there is this way where some of us have a sort of, well, not necessarily repressed, but we have a not that highly prioritized heart center. For other people, it's other centers. For the primary types, it looks a bit different. But the thing is also that the heart center will not just be your like emotional side and your self-image and that kind of heart center stuff that we talk about with the heart center. It will also be something that goes for absolutely everybody, which is like the space that connects you as a whole human being, as the thing that is literally connecting your instinctual animal self to whatever higher thing you are. And so I like to say this: the journey of the centers, as I see it, is like it's 4 stages. It's like you can look at the gut, you look at the heart, you look at the head, and then you look at the heart. And it's not a heart as we describe it in the centers. It's a deeper heart. It's where
The spaciousness.
yeah, and also this like absolute inclusion, this
Yes.
this
Yeah.
unconditional welcome, whatever we want to call it, but
Yeah. Words are hard, but
it's not.
It's
Yeah,
like, to me, it's like a communing.
yeah,
I'm accessing communing with other beings. Sense of feeling. Again, from my heart, it's a sense of an infusion of love going in and out. That my heart is open, and I feel the beauty of other people around me, and the fundamental goodness of them. I mean, again, these are words that point to an inner experience that doesn't have words, but something that is like more inclusive as opposed to being
That,
separate.
that's definitely part of it. And that would be, I think that would be part of even the first bit of the heart for me, in sort of the higher end of it, whatever we call it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you and I would be different as a 4 and the 8. Russ likes to say it's like one is the other inverted. And it's but when you say this is about communing with others and knowing their fundamental goodness, to me, this deeper heart, if I were to use those words, it's about my fundamental goodness. That's what's missing. I'm going to arrive at other people's fundamental goodness long before
Yours.
and even while being a rejection type and not that convinced about this fundamental goodness.
Yeah.
But still, it's like my own fundamental goodness, because this is not the basket where I put my eggs. Let's put it that way. So this is I say that's for the 8s who've been doing it for a while.
Yeah.
Deeper heart, and
Beautiful.
what it will give you, among other, and I think what your friend was missing, I would guess, is this.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm only just starting on that journey, because I think
Beautiful.
that.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, anything that you haven't got to speak to, or that you've evaluated? Like, well, give me 5 more hours. I'm just warming up here.
Exactly.
Yeah. But anything just for now that you would like to add?
I think for everybody again, only to remember that the Enneagram, but learning about the Enneagram, learning about your type, recognizing stuff, that's all well and good and very helpful, but the journey starts after that.
Yeah.
The journey starts once you have that, or not. It doesn't really matter, but the journey is not that. That is just packing the suitcase.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, it's like creating the library of knowledge, and now how do we live it or feel it or breathe it? And that's a lot of people like myself had to be thrown onto that part. I didn't necessarily volunteer. It's like, whew, I'm in it now. I can't get out. So
and that's why my entry into the Enneagram was so different, because I came from there. That was the default, and then I sort of got into this with this exciting model and everything, and then I realized people are just doing the model and they're not.
yeah.
So it's just an interesting clash, but I love the combination, because the Enneagram is just so rich, and we can take that with us into this depth.
Absolutely.
Not get taken into the Enneagram's depth and our type, and
and getting all identified with that.
That into our own depth.
Really into the mystery of your being.
Yeah.
Well, say a little bit about your work. I know you said you're calling from Sweden, and is it summer there? Is it winter there? Like what?
Summer.
Yeah, same here.
I was just talking to South Africa earlier. She was like with a scarf.
Yes.
It's so interesting. It still gets to me. It's like, what? Is it really true? Do you really
I know. I've got a couple clients in South Africa, and they're all bundled up, and I'm going, this doesn't quite compute.
No, it doesn't. And it's like, well, I'm 54 now, and it should have, but I'm into the experiential thing. I can't experience the cold right now. Anyway, what I'm doing is, Enneagram-wise, I have this website that is my last name without the dots and without the space, lyckowbäckman.com. And sorry, .se actually. Just because I'm speaking in English, I think everything should be .com, but it's .se. Where if you Google exploring the Enneagram, or even my name, you'll find it, because my name I'm the only one who has it. And so I'm not really, I don't have a lot to offer if you want to learn the Enneagram. I have some pointers to offer if you want to learn the Enneagram to keep with you as you go along in other places. But then I have some evergreen courses and some online courses that will be teacher-led. Right now, there's none of those, but they're coming in the autumn. And also I have this book that you were talking about. I'll soon have this next book that I'm talking about. And yeah, and obviously I do individual sessions. I do regular individual sessions for inner work with or
Yeah.
without the Enneagram as a guide.
Yep.
And then I do this instinctual exploration, which is a separate kind of session, which entails a bit more than that. So that's what I have to offer so far. I also have to offer I was in the conference on the vertical track, so I'm in the library now. Been in the library a couple of times actually, because we had one of these live things last year as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's me, I think.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the richness of your sharing and the depth that you are exploring at, and yeah, just your beautiful spirit. It's just great to be with you and get to talk with you, because this is really the first time I remember having an in-depth conversation with you, and it's just been a pleasure for me.
For me, I've just seen you sit and type like a maniac in front of Don and Russ to capture everything they said on part two. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and hope to have further connection with you down the road. So, so thank you, and many blessings. And I will stop the recording.